My name is Mauricio Diazgranados. I am a research leader for sustainable use, seeds and solutions at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. I lead also the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, aiming to provide solutions to address environmental and societal challenges. And in my project, I develop plant and fungal diversity approaches to support communities in locations and economies where nutritional, income, and biodiversity issues are of paramount importance.
Wonderful, that's very interesting. So good day, my name is Professor Paul Monks. I am the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'm here to host this afternoon's Good Development conversation. That was really interesting, Maurizio, around that, and we're going to be talking about today your lessons earned around kind of fungi and biodiversity and economic development, an interesting intersection of things to explore as part of that. So how did you find the process of coming up with your lessons earned?
Well, thank you, Paul, for the introduction. After several years working on large projects in Colombia and other countries in South America, and especially after leading the Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia project funded by Newton Fund, I found the process of coming up with my lessons earned not so difficult. Why? Because I have been collecting all these lessons over the years, trying to improve every time when I lead a new project. So it was kind of summarizing all the lessons I've got through the years.
That's quite interesting, because I've done the exercise as well, because I thought that if I've got to ask all these people about their lessons earned, I should have a go at it as well. And I found it actually relatively easy, in the sense that you realize there are certain principles or lessons earned, if you want to call them that are core to the way that you do research. But I was particularly struck by your lesson number 2, which was have fluent and frequent communication. Can you tell me a little more about that one?
Yes, so multi-directional communication across a project is one of the keys to success. With that, I mean both internal and external communication, and not just top-down, but also bottom-up communication, are particularly key. This is very important in large projects, let's say involving more than 20 people.
Yeah.
Because the team needs to be informed, but also the project office and managers must know how things are happening, are going on the lower levels of the organization. Sometimes people tend to focus on their responsibilities, and that is fine, of course, but sometimes they lose track on what is happening in the overall project, or even of the project objectives. That is when having a fluent and frequent communication is key. So, for instance, maintaining the focus on the project goals, to update the team, and to keep the team engagement and commitment high. For that, depending on the project, it may be very useful to develop and follow a strategy for communication within project, but also a strategy of engagement. So I believe this is quite important when managing a large project.
No, I think that's important, actually. And I think if we are to do the best science as well, it's that question of listening to all the voices. That everybody, nobody has the right answer in this. So that open and fluent communication means that actually you get the best exchange of ideas as well, which is really important to doing top quality science. I think that's a really interesting reflection about it, and clearly you love communicating, which is great as well. So of the lessons, which would you say was the hardest won lesson?
I would think it was lesson number 4, adapt to uncertain scenarios. Sometimes unpredicted events occur, changing the plans and threatening the project committed outputs. And when that happens, the project managers and PIs need to use all their skills and experience to rapidly make the best decisions to adapt to those scenarios. Let me give you an example. When I started the Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia project in late November 2020, a project with a heavy fieldwork in Colombia, we soon after, we were hit by the COVID pandemic in February 2021. The day I recruited my project manager, the whole UK was put under lockdown. And as a matter of fact, I met my project manager in person only after the completion of the project. We thought it was going to be the lockdown for 1 month and the restrictions, then for 3 months, then for 6 months, and we never thought it was going to last for almost 2 years. It was like a journey on a boat that after leaving the dock was hit by a hurricane that lasted 2 years. And we were constantly replanning and rebudgeting, making new scenarios of the new scenarios. But at the end, we managed to deliver every single output. And not just that, we largely exceeded them. So the COVID pandemic proved to be a test of resilience, mitigation, and adaptation. But we adapted through strengthening digital outreach outputs and opportunities, allowing us to significantly increase impact and outcomes. So I think it was the hardest lesson. We managed to navigate the scenarios and to complete the project successfully.
So in a way, what you're actually saying is you managed to actually complete a field project without you actually ever having to go to the field. So
exactly.
That's quite a feat in some respects, isn't it? You know.
Yes, that unfortunately we were very lucky that we managed to build very strong partnerships with our in-country partners, who actually managed to do all the field work without us. So if it wasn't because of the partners, we wouldn't be able to finish the project.
So it's really, I mean, that in international research, you know, partners are everything, aren't they? And partnership working, and that willingness, I guess, to work without ever having to meet. So I guess it comes back to your early lesson about that communication piece, that even if that communication is digital, you can still build those partnerships, get those shared goals by good communication, but also by this question of adaptation, which is a really important part of doing science, isn't it?
That's totally correct. Yeah, that was absolutely key for the project.
One of the ones that really kind of caught my eye actually a little bit, and I wonder what the story behind the lesson was number 5. You know, large projects require stronger core teams. So what was the basis of that one?
Well, this lesson is about the system theory. So there are always emergent properties when multiple parts interact. And in a large project, it is likely to encounter more difficult issues that require stronger core teams. Let me give you an example. With the Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia project, delivering 3 scientific portals among other outputs, we wanted to create a project website in both English and Spanish, accessible to all the beneficiaries. It looked a simple task when we proposed it, but then it became a tsunami of issues. We needed to comply with the EU and the Colombian General Data Protection Regulation. We could not host the content in US servers. We needed to hire additional consultants to improve the user experience and the user interface designs. We needed to implement the WebSocket security protocols. We had to discuss the content and design with all the comms teams from all the partner institutions. And we had to develop a protocol of maintenance and commitments after the completion of the project. Thus, it became a huge task at the end, taking lots of resources from the project office, way beyond the expertise of the team of scientists involved in the project. So therefore, if you have a large project, budget for an experienced project manager, sufficient administrative support, a communication specialist, and ad hoc technical and scientific positions. Otherwise, you might be in troubles.
No, I think it's interesting that question about communication. I mean, again, there's a flavour coming through this kind of conversation, isn't there? Because, you know, this is now the electronic side of that communication. And you know, it kind of pulls your first 2 lessons together, communicate and adapt. And here you are having to kind of meet the challenges of you know, electronic-based communication from the web, and 2 countries that have very different legislative kind of backgrounds around that. It's very interesting in the way that actually that flexibility and thinking about what your core team looks like and how that core team skills set looks like. It's quite important to these larger type projects, which is probably a kind of a good segue, because we've talked a lot about your lessons learned, but I'm quite keen to hear a little bit more about the project itself. So it was, as you said a number of times, it was called Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia. So can you tell me a little bit more about that, and what was the problem that you were trying to address with the research?
Yeah, absolutely. So me as a Colombian scientist and expert on plant diversity and nature-based solutions, I've been always shocked about why the most biodiverse areas in the tropics are usually the poorest, where communities have, in these areas, communities have the biggest social challenges, such as poverty, high inequality, food insecurity, poor health, gender imbalance, etc. This is, of course, the case of Colombia, the world's second most biodiverse country, recognized as one of the most ethnically diverse countries, but one of the most unequal, with generalized rural poverty and an economy primarily based on fossil fuels. Therefore, the main problem I wanted to address was how we can support the development of this country's bioeconomy based on the sustainable use of its plants and fungi. We also wanted to develop pathways to enhance nature's contribution to the well-being of people in this country. For that, we established this very large project called Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia with 4 work packages. The first one was to gather all the information, all the knowledge on useful plants and fungi available, and carry out scientific research to understand the taxonomic and phylogenetic breadth of this diversity, the geographic distribution and gaps of knowledge, the conservation priorities, and even how we could use citizen science to mitigate the traditional knowledge erosion. During this phase, we compiled the largest databases on useful plants and fungi that exist for this country, with over 36,000 species profiles and over 160 scientific names. We also scanned all the available herbarium and fungarium specimens, historic documents and related materials. We collected over 20,000 photographs of leaf specimens, developed over 10,000 distribution maps and models, 4 digital apps, among other outputs. That was all the first work package. The second was to implement an aggressive communication strategy to broadly disseminate this knowledge and engage society. We wanted that every Colombian could be aware of the country's potential as a bioeconomy based on its unique biodiversity. For that, we ran a national level survey to know how much Colombian society knows about its useful plants and fungi. We developed a communication strategy. We launched 2 portals called Planta, focused on plants, and called Fungi, focused on fungi, with all the information related to Colombian plants and fungi illustrated in 2 booklets as well. We published 4 books, including 2 large volumes containing the catalogs of useful plants and fungi of Colombia. We produced 12 reports and booklets, 13 manuscripts for journal publications, 3 of them already published. We delivered 28 conference presentations, 9 videos, 10 games, and educative tools. And we published 58 newspaper articles with over 42 million opportunities to view, and 5 websites and portals. Also, we had some social channels, some of them reaching almost 1 million views. The third work package was to develop a totally free value chain network platform to create and support sustainable value chains. The portal is somehow like a Gumtree or eBay platform, but based on bioproducts to facilitate the interaction among all the actors along the value chains. It is called Ready in Colombia, and in there anyone can post and trade bioproducts based on plants and fungi of Colombia. The platform is linked to the taxonomic backbone of Colplanta and Colfungi, allowing us to monitor and control which species are traded. And to my knowledge, this is the first of its kind. And the last work package consisted of implementing the framework of value chain networks in 3 pilot biodiversity areas of Colombia recently affected by the conflict in this country, to see if we could help delivering solutions and improve livelihoods of communities in those areas. So this project was one of the Show Me projects by the Colombia government, but also it was in the heart of the local communities where we worked. So my lesson here is not to underestimate the impact the project can have on society, but rather try to maximize the outreach and the outcomes of the project you lead, because you may surprise yourself with how far you can go, as we managed to do in this project.
Well, that's an amazing kind of end-to-end, from the taxonomy to the impact, if you will, of both the plants and the fungi, and that idea that you trade them, and for those people who are probably not quite familiar with this, there's many natural products that you can get from plants and fungi, which are the basis of many things, including drugs, or at least candidate drugs for sort of this. And of course, as you said, Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the world. So there's a lot of, I guess, undiscovered. Did you discover new plants and fungi, or was it about mapping the ones that were there? 20,000, I think you said, which seems an enormous number.
Well, actually, the numbers are huge. In every category of use, we found incredible numbers. Let me give you an example. In terms of plants, we have reported over 7,400 species of useful plants.
Right.
Medicinal plants, we have more than 5,100 species. Edible plants, 3,806 edible plants. And that's a huge number. If you compare that, we recently published a paper with 7,000 edible plants for the world. Colombia has almost 50% of them, or over 50% of them actually. Yeah. So it's incredible. These numbers are incredible, and they reflect the potential of a biodiverse country to develop its bioeconomy, to protect also the diversity, because if these countries lose their biodiversity, they have lost the resources. So our principle is conservation through use. If we can promote the use of these resources, the society, the governments will invest more efforts in preserving those resources as well.
No, and that's a really important point here. I mean, in a way that doing the science here facilitates a sustainable future, both for the plants in themselves, but also for the people and the landscape that harbours that diversity as well. So it's a very important sort of circular lesson, and helps governments understand the importance of the biodiversity that it is a steward for, if you want to call it that. But I mean, that's an amazing sense that nearly 50% of or more than 50% of the species that are in Colombia in edible plants are more than 50% of the world's edible plants, which is quite a kind of salient sort of thought, really, isn't it? In terms of that, conservation through science is always a good virtuous circle to have, I think, as well. So, what part of this was working with international partners, as you talked about early on. Could you draw out a lesson around working on the project with your international partners that resonated with you?
Yes, I think it's key when you're working with international partners, besides keeping a very good communication, fluent and frequent communication, but also to keep a clear and transparent organizational structure, especially in large projects.
Yeah.
In the case of the Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia project, we had a team of 119 people working together.
Yeah.
50 of which were from Kew Gardens, 35 were from the Humboldt Institute in Colombia, and 34 were from 26 other institutions, mainly in Colombia.
Yeah.
And so we had a total of 15 research questions in the project, 33 main activities or core activities, and 32 discrete outputs committed in the project, although we delivered 140. It was more like a program with multiple sub-projects all interconnected.
Yeah.
And to maintain the control, we had to set up a transparent project management structure internally and externally, and we had to hold regular meetings to monitor progress, discuss issues, and solve problems as they arise. And by doing this, anybody could understand what each member of the team was doing. Otherwise, it would have been almost impossible to achieve what we did. So that was very key for the success of the project, to keep a clear and transparent organizational structure.
Yeah, and I think it all comes home, and it goes back to 7,000 plants or that you were looking at. You need big teams to do that, and everybody has to know their role, and you have to have really good, I guess, standard operating procedures as well. To keep it consistent across. I don't know how many organizations there were in the end there, but quite a few organizations that are all doing different parts of the same sort of thing. But exactly. That sense of team, but that sense of common goals, I think, comes through your lesson of keeping a clear and transparent organizational structure. That's quite important. So we're nearing the end of our conversation now. It's been really fascinating to kind of hear about all the different elements that have led to useful plants and fungi of Colombia, and I hope somebody can put the in the material that goes with this conversation on the website, because I think it would be really interesting to see electronic media that you've talked about and be able to look at some of the plants and fungi that you've discovered. So whoever's putting it together, if I can put that suggestion in as part of this conversation, that would be great.
Absolutely,
yes. Yeah, because that's clearly the output of this. It's great. But if you had to boil it all down to one lesson, which would be the most important and why?
Probably my main lesson is to keep prioritizing.
Yeah.
We need to keep our attention on what we want to achieve. A successful project can catalyze many interesting opportunities. However, we must keep our focus on the project goals, aims, and objectives, and mind the well-being of all the project team, including the leaders. And this, I would say, this is a lesson not just for a project, but for life. We live in a moment of history in which our world needs our urgent help. We are destroying nature, and we are changing forever the world as we know it. We need to concentrate our focus on solving the main environmental issues we are facing now: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. This is why our projects should try to tackle those issues, and we must prioritize those challenges humanity is facing now.
Wow, is there any bigger goal than those? So that lesson of keep prioritizing, large team, being transparent, clear on the goals, but also I think probably what you haven't talked about is an element of where a project where everybody could see that the goal was worth achieving. There's something worth conserving, but something worth also using to help mankind. Around the way that we can harness that biodiversity for good around this. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much, Mauricio, for telling us about your project and the work that you've done, and also for telling us about your lessons learned and why those lessons were important to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Paul.